The street was hot, dusty, and loud. But all the noise went quiet in Jacob's ears the moment he bent his knees, slid his hands under an old woman's arms, and lifted her onto his back. People stared. Then they laughed. Some clapped like it was a joke. Some pointed phones and pressed record. One boy shouted, "See secretary boy carrying stranger like sack of rice." A woman hissed, "Leave her, she's always there begging. She will stain your shirt." Another man shook his head and said, "This is Lagos. Mind your business." Jacob didn't stop. He stood up straight, his white long sleeve tucked into black trousers, his ID card swinging on his chest. The old woman's white lace was dirty and torn. Dust masked her cheeks. Her voice was thin like paper. "Please, I can't remember my house. Help me." "I will help you, Mama," Jacob said, breath tight but steady. "Hold me well." He took a step. Laughter rose higher behind him. That was when a black SUV screeched to a stop at the far end of the street. Doors flew open. Men in clean suits jumped out. The crowd gasped, cameras still rolling. A tall man in dark glasses scanned the road like he was searching for gold. "Where did you find her?" A voice boomed. Jacob froze. The old woman trembled on his back. The crowd went silent. Jacob's day had started with a small prayer and a cold bath in his one-room apartment. He was 20, an orphan since 16, and a secretary at a small fintech company in Yaba. His job paid little but taught him plenty. He arranged meetings. He typed minutes. He fixed printers when they jammed. He smiled even when customers didn't. He wore a simple white shirt every day, washed by hand at night, and ironed with care before dawn. His parents had taught him one rule: do not walk past someone who needs help. That afternoon, on his way home from work, he saw her. She was on the dusty ground near the junction, sitting like a broken matchbox. People walked around her like she was a stone on the road. Cars swerved. A Kiki driver shouted, "Mama, shift!" No one stopped. Tears drew clean lines down her dusty face. "Please, someone, help me. I'm looking for my son," she said, voice shaking. "I can't remember our house again." Jacob slowed, his heart squeezed. He stepped closer. "Mama," he said softly, kneeling so he could see her eyes. "What is your name? Where do you live?" She blinked like her memory was behind a locked door. I don't know. Everything is fog. But my son is looking for me. I know it." "Do you remember his name?" Jacob asked. She looked at him hard, like his face might hold the key. Her lips moved. No sound came. She shook her head and began to cry again. Behind Jacob, footsteps and whispers gathered. "Leave her," someone said. "She is always begging." "She's dirty," another added. "Don't let her stain your fine shirt." Jacob swallowed. His parents' rule stood inside him like a lamp. He slipped his hands under her arms. "Mama, let me carry you. I will take you to my room first. We will clean your hands. We will think together." She nodded very slowly. He lifted. The laughter began. Phones rose like bright insects, capturing every step. Jacob, the quiet fintech secretary, carrying a stranger through the heat while dust climbed up around his legs and her white lace fluttered like a tired flag. He reached his compound, a narrow place with cracked walls and 2 mango trees that gave more shade than fruit. He pushed open the gate with his hip, climbed the short steps, and entered his small room. One bed, one old couch with a sunken middle, a small table with 2 cups, a kettle. He set the woman down on the couch. She sank into the cushion like it was water. "Please wait," he said. He boiled water. He broke half of his last bread and placed it on a plate. He mixed powdered milk with hot water and stirred a little sugar he had saved in a clear nylon. He brought the cup to her with both hands. She watched him carefully, like she was measuring something he could not see. She sipped. Her shoulders dropped. The shaking in her hands slowed. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are a good boy." Jacob smiled. "You're welcome, Mama. We will figure this out. Do you remember anything? A street sign? A friend's name? Your son's school? Work?" She pressed her fingers to her forehead. My son. She closed her eyes and a tear slipped out. "He works with computers. Many computers. He travels. People know him." Jacob leaned in. His heart beat faster. "Does your son have a name people say on TV?" Then, Like a light turning on in a dark room, she breathed a single word. George. George what? Her mouth trembled. George. Tech for Africa. Jacob didn't move. The name hit him like a wave. George, the George Tech for Africa's CEO. The man whose face passed across billboards. The man who gave talks about building jobs in Nigeria. The man Jacob had watched on TV and told himself, work harder. He set the cup down, hands shaking a little. Mama, he said softly. What is your name? Janet, she replied. They call me Madam Janet at church. Jacob blinked. His mind raced. If she is telling the truth, if she is his mother, then she is missing. He grabbed his small Android from the table, opened the browser, and typed Tech for Africa contact number. The page loaded slow. His network was weak. He moved closer to the window, held the phone high, and waited for the bars to climb. Outside, two neighbors pretended to sweep while listening. A boy pressed his face to the window like a cat. Jacob dialed the number he found. A voice answered. Good afternoon. Tech for Africa. How may I help you? Good afternoon, Jacob said, trying to sound calm. My name is Jacob. I think I found someone. An older woman. She says her name is Madam Janet. She says her son is George. The line was quiet for one long second. Then the voice rushed back. Please hold. Jacob's pulse thumped. He looked at Madam Janet. She looked back, her eyes tired but kinder now. The voice returned. Sir, please confirm address. He gave the address, house number, street, the mango trees, the small yellow shop with a cracked sign that read, God is able cold drinks. Thank you, the voice said. Please stay with her. Do not let her go. Someone will call you shortly. The call ended. Jacob exhaled. He turned to Madam Janet. Mama, help is coming. Drink more. She smiled thinly and took another sip. You are like my son, she said, kind. Outside, the compound door banged. More neighbors came in, pretending to buy sachet water. One woman said loudly, So he carried her? Reward is coming. A man laughed. This boy thinks kindness pays rent. Jacob ignored them. He pulled the curtain gently to give Madam Janet privacy. He took a small towel, dipped it in warm water, and wiped the dust from her hands. He did the same for her face, careful and slow, like washing a baby. 10 minutes later, his phone rang. Unknown number, he answered. Hello? A calm voice spoke. Is this Jacob? Yes, sir. This is George. The voice belonged to the billboards. Steady, deep. Is my mother with you? Jacob swallowed. Yes, sir. She is safe. Send me your location, George said. I'll be there soon. Jacob sent the pin. His hands buzzed like a small wire was running through them. He slid the phone into his pocket and turned to Madam Janet. Mama, your son is coming. She covered her mouth. Tears rolled down fresh, clean lines on her cheeks. George, she whispered. My boy. Outside, someone ran to the street, shouting, Convoy is coming, convoy. The compound shook with footsteps. Children squealed. The smell of hot engines rushed in like wind. Jacob stepped out to the corridor and saw the first black SUV slide to a stop. Then another, and another. Security men spread like chess pieces. Neighbors dropped everything, brooms, buckets, gossip, and stared with wide eyes that said, history is happening here. The biggest SUV door opened. A tall man stepped out in a navy suit, no tie, clean beard. His eyes were not on the crowd. They were searching the building like a magnet, seeking a lost nail. Where is Jacob? He asked. I'm here, Jacob said, lifting a hand he wasn't sure was steady. Sir, your mother is inside. George took 3 quick steps toward him, then stopped as a short, nervous man from the crowd jumped forward, pointing at Jacob. Wait, the man shouted. That's not her son's helper. He just wants reward. He's lying. Gasps snapped through the air. Security turned. George's eyes moved from the man to Jacob. Jacob felt every eye in the compound land on his face, every laugh from earlier circling back like a bird. He took a breath. Sir, he said, voice clear but tight, please come and see your mother. George nodded once and pushed past the voices toward the door. He had not yet reached the threshold when a second SUV door opened and a woman's voice cried out from inside the car. George, wait! Don't go in alone. The entire compound held its breath. Who was she? Why did her warning sound like danger? The moment the woman's voice echoed from the second SUV, the crowd fell completely silent. Even the mango leaves above Jacob's compound seemed to freeze. George turned sharply. Juliana? From the car, a tall, elegant woman stepped out. Her fitted blue gown shimmered faintly under the sun, her gold earrings swinging as she walked. Her face was pale with fear. "George, please wait," she said, holding her husband's arm. "We don't know who this man is. He could be one of the kidnappers." The crowd gasped again. Jacob's heart thumped. "Kidnappers?" "Yes," George said, voice low and heavy. "My mother was kidnapped a week ago. We've searched everywhere." Juliana gripped her purse tightly. "They warned us not to talk to anyone, if this is a trap." Jacob stepped forward, both hands raised in calm. "Ma, I didn't kidnap her. I found her on the road. She was crying and asking for help." The security men tensed. George's eyes narrowed, scanning Jacob's face for any sign of a lie. Then, from inside the small room, came a weak, trembling voice. "George." Everyone turned. The billionaire froze mid-step. The voice had cut through everything, through the whispers, the suspicion, the fear. His jaw tightened, and he walked toward the door. Juliana followed, clutching his sleeve. When he pushed the door open, the air inside felt thick and still. Madame Janet sat on the couch, wrapped in a faded blanket Jacob had placed over her. Her eyes were glassy with tears. The moment she saw George, she struggled to her feet, her legs shaking. "George, my son." George's face broke. He crossed the room in 2 steps, dropped to his knees, and hugged her. "Mummy, Mummy, I'm sorry," he whispered, voice cracking. "I thought I'd lost you." The crowd outside began to clap softly. Some people wiped tears from their faces. Even Juliana, standing near the door, covered her mouth, crying quietly. Madame Janet held her son's face in her palms, touching his cheeks as if to make sure he was real. "They left me on the road," she whispered. "They took my phone, my bag. I begged for help. Nobody stopped, until this young man came." She pointed at Jacob. George turned to look at him. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he stood and walked forward. "You carried my mother?" "Yes, sir." "You fed her? You called us?" "Yes, sir." George exhaled deeply, almost like someone letting go of a heavy stone. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't know who she was, but you helped anyway." Jacob nodded, still stunned that the man he saw on TV was standing in his small room, his expensive perfume mixing with the smell of old furniture. George turned to his guards. "Prepare the car. She's going home now." Then to Jacob, "You're coming with us." Jacob blinked. "Me?" "Yes," George said, glancing around at the cracked walls and small window. "I want you to see where your kindness has brought you." As they led Madame Janet out, the crowd outside buzzed with excitement. Phones rose again. People who had laughed at Jacob before now called his name like he was a celebrity. "Jacob, you did well," one woman shouted. "Nah, this kind helper we need for this country," another man said. Jacob didn't reply. He just helped Madame Janet into the SUV. The leather seat looked too clean for his dusty clothes, but he sat quietly at the far edge while George and Juliana whispered to each other. The convoy rolled out. The drive took 40 minutes through Lagos traffic, then into a quiet estate where every house looked like a dream. The gate to George's mansion opened slowly, revealing a fountain, manicured flowers, and a driveway long enough for 3 cars to park side by side. Jacob's heart pounded. He had only seen places like this on TV. "Welcome home, Ma," one of the guards said as they helped Madame Janet down. She smiled faintly. "Home." Juliana held her hand as they walked inside. The living room glowed with gold lights, white marble tiles, and paintings that looked older than Jacob's entire life. George turned to Jacob. "Please, sit." Jacob hesitated before perching on the edge of a cream sofa. He didn't want to stain anything. George looked at him with a small smile. "You look nervous." "A little, sir." "You shouldn't be. My mother said you saved her life. For that my family is forever grateful." Before Jacob could respond, a middle-aged man in a white coat entered George's private doctor. "Sir, I've checked her," the doctor said. "She's weak but stable. No major injury. She just needs rest." George nodded. "Thank you." Then he turned to Jacob. "Come with me." They stepped out into the garden, where the air smelled of roses and rain. George stopped near a stone bench and faced Jacob. "What do you do for a living?" he asked. "I'm a secretary, sir, at a small fintech firm in Yaba." "You live alone?" "Yes, sir. My parents died years ago." George studied him for a moment. "Do you like your job?" Jacob hesitated. "I'm grateful for it, sir. But sometimes it feels like I'm meant for something more." George smiled slightly, the kind of smile people make when they've already decided something. "You are right. Starting tomorrow, you'll be my special assistant." Jacob's mouth fell open. "Sir?" George chuckled. "You've proven you can take responsibility and act fast under pressure. Those are rare qualities. You'll live here for now, until we set up your office." Jacob didn't know whether to speak or cry. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say." "Just keep being yourself," George said, clapping his shoulder. "That's all I ask." As they walked back into the mansion, Madame Janet was already laughing softly in the sitting room while sipping warm tea. Juliana sat beside her, brushing her hair gently. When Jacob entered, Madame Janet called him. "Come, my son, sit near me." He sat on a stool beside her. "You remind me of George when he was your age," she said. "Kind, determined, always ready to help." George smiled at that. "He's even better, Mama." Jacob's eyes filled with tears. He wiped them quickly, embarrassed. That night, they gave him a room bigger than his entire apartment. White sheets, soft pillows, and a view of the city lights. When he lay down, it felt like floating. He could hardly believe it was real. But just as he began to close his eyes, a soft knock came on the door. It was Juliana. She smiled faintly. "You did a good thing, Jacob. My mother-in-law means everything to us." "Thank you, Ma." She hesitated, then added quietly, "Be careful, though. This family has many eyes watching. Kindness can draw both love and jealousy." Before Jacob could ask what she meant, she turned and walked away, her heels tapping down the corridor until the sound faded into silence. Jacob sat still in the moonlit room, her words echoing in his mind. Jealousy? From who? Downstairs, he could faintly hear Madame Janet's laughter mixing with George's voice. For a moment, everything felt perfect, like his life had finally opened into light. But somewhere inside the mansion, behind one of the closed doors, another voice whispered to someone on the phone. "He's already here. The boy they're calling a hero. I'll make sure he doesn't last long." The screen of the hidden phone glowed faintly, reflecting on a cold pair of eyes. The next morning, sunlight poured gently through the glass windows of George's mansion, painting the white walls gold. The birds outside sang on the balcony railings, and the fountain in the garden sparkled like scattered diamonds. Jacob woke up slowly, still half unsure if everything that happened was real. He rubbed his eyes, stretched, and stared around the luxurious room, the soft rug, the tall wardrobe, and the polished desk where a tablet sat waiting for him. For a boy who once shared a room with leaking ceilings and a single fan that only worked on cool nights, this felt like a dream. But dreams sometimes hide secrets. When Jacob stepped out of his room, he met a young maid sweeping the hallway. She stopped and smiled shyly. "Good morning, sir." He blinked. "Sir?" "Please. Just call me Jacob." She giggled. "Ogre George said you are his new assistant, so you are our ogre now." Jacob smiled awkwardly. "No ogre here, just Jacob." As he walked down the long marble hallway, the scent of coffee filled the air. Madame Janet's laughter drifted from the garden downstairs. He followed the sound and found her sitting under a white umbrella, wearing a clean Ankara wrapper and sipping tea. Her face looked brighter, younger even. She waved when she saw him. "My son, come and sit." Jacob sat beside her, smiling. "Mama, you look strong this morning." "Ah, thanks to you, my dear. I slept well for the first time in days." Just then, George appeared in a navy suit, phone in hand. "Morning, Mama. Morning, Jacob." "Good morning, sir," Jacob replied quickly. George gave a warm nod. "After breakfast, meet me in the study. You'll start working today. There's a project we're presenting to the board next week. You'll help me coordinate it." Jacob's heart raced. "Yes, sir." Madame Janet looked at her son proudly. "See how fast life changes. Yesterday, this boy carried me on his back, and today he's your assistant." George laughed softly. "Kindness lifts faster than any elevator." But from the balcony above, someone watched, eyes cold, lips tight. It was Roland, George's longtime personal assistant. He had served the billionaire for 5 years and had quietly assumed he was the only one George could ever trust. Until Jacob showed up. Downstairs, the family doctor arrived to check Madame Janet again. George went to work in the study, and Jacob followed. The office was wide and modern, lined with tall glass windows and shelves of awards. George placed a tablet in Jacob's hands. "That's your schedule and my daily calendar. You'll coordinate my calls, handle local emails, and join meetings to take notes. I believe in trust, Jacob. And I don't keep people I don't trust." Jacob nodded firmly. "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best." "Good. Lunch is at 1. And ignore the noise." Jacob frowned slightly. "What noise, sir?" George smiled faintly but didn't answer. He turned back to his laptop. By mid-morning, Jacob was already buried in work. The company's messages came non-stop. He typed fast, organized files, and impressed George with how quickly he understood everything. But every few minutes, he felt someone's eyes on him. When he finally glanced up, Roland was standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "You're fast," he said with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. Jacob rose politely. "Good morning, sir." Roland laughed under his breath. "Don't call me sir. You're the boss's favorite now." "I didn't mean—" Roland cut him off. "I know why you're here. Don't think kindness alone will keep you in this house. People forget kindness. They remember loyalty." Jacob didn't understand what he meant, but the tone made his chest tighten. Before he could reply, Roland turned and walked away. The rest of the day passed quietly. At lunch, George introduced Jacob to the mansion's staff, the chef, the cleaners, and the driver. Everyone smiled politely, but Jacob could feel tension like thin glass between them. That evening, as sunset spread orange light over the compound, Madame Janet sat again in the garden with Jacob beside her. "Mama," he said gently, "how did you end up on that road?" She sighed deeply. "It's still like a bad dream. I was returning from church. A car stopped near me. I thought it was the driver George sent. Then everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in a small room with 2 strange men. They asked for my son's contact, but I refused. I kept praying. 2 days later, they blindfolded me, drove for hours, and threw me out on that road." Jacob's chest tightened. "You went through all that alone?" She nodded slowly. "But God sent you." She reached for his hand. "Never change, my son. Don't let wealth or power harden your heart." "I won't, Mama," Jacob said. "I promise." At that moment, George's wife, Juliana, came into the garden, smiling. "Mama, dinner's ready. Jacob, please join us." The dining table sparkled under soft lights. Plates of jollof rice, grilled fish, and fruit juice filled the air with warm smells. Madame Janet ate slowly, while George and Juliana spoke about company expansion plans. Halfway through dinner, Roland entered quietly and whispered something into George's ear. George's brow furrowed. "What? When?" Roland handed him a folded piece of paper. Juliana looked up. "What's wrong, dear?" "Nothing serious," George said, forcing a calm smile. "Just company data, we'll handle it later." But Jacob noticed how his boss's eyes hardened. Later that night, as Jacob was heading to his room, he saw George and Roland speaking in the hallway in low tones. When they noticed him, they stopped. "Good night, sir," Jacob said politely. George nodded. Roland didn't. When Jacob entered his room, his phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. "Be careful who you trust in that house." Jacob froze. He looked at the door, the window, everywhere. No one was there. He typed back, "Who is this?" No reply. He switched off the light and lay in bed, staring into the dark. Morning came with cloudy skies. George called Jacob early. "We're heading to the company headquarters. I want you to join the meeting." Jacob got ready quickly, wearing a crisp white shirt George had sent to his room earlier. He looked at himself in the mirror, neat, confident, almost unrecognizable. When they reached Tech for Africa Towers, the employees stared at him curiously. Whispers followed him down the corridor. "That's the new assistant. He's the one who saved Madame Janet." Inside the conference room, Jacob took notes quietly while George presented his project. The meeting went well until a security officer entered suddenly, holding a tablet. "Sir, he said, whispering to George. "We found something." George frowned. "Show me." The guard showed him the screen. George's face darkened instantly. He turned to Jacob. "Did you send this file?" Jacob blinked. "What file, sir?" "This one." George's voice was sharper now. "A private document from my email was forwarded from your account at midnight." Jacob's stomach dropped. "That's impossible. I didn't." "Enough," George snapped, his voice echoing through the room. "Security, take his device." The room went silent. Everyone stared. Jacob stood frozen, shock flooding his face. "Sir, please believe me, I would never do that." But George's eyes were cold now. "Until I find the truth, stay away from the office." Security gently but firmly guided Jacob out. He could hear the whispers behind him, some pitying, some mocking. Outside the building, the sky broke into rain. Jacob stood alone under the overhang, soaked in disbelief. How could everything collapse so fast? He remembered Juliana's warning, kindness can draw both love and jealousy. Now he knew what she meant. And far away, in the tinted car parked by the corner, Roland lowered his phone, watching Jacob through the rain-streaked window. He smiled slowly, whispering, "That's what happens when you forget who was here first." The rain came down in sheets, beating against the pavement and turning the city lights into a blur of silver and red. Jacob stood there motionless, his white shirt soaked through, his chest heavy with disbelief. Only yesterday, he had been celebrated as a hero. Now, the same people who had admired him at Tech for Africa whispered behind glass doors and pointed fingers as he walked out like a criminal. He raised his eyes toward the sky. "God, why? I was only trying to do good." But the only reply was thunder. He took a slow step away from the building, each one feeling heavier than the last. His phone buzzed again, an unknown number. He opened it, shielding the screen from the rain. Unknown. "They've set you up. Don't go home." Jacob's heart jolted. He typed back quickly. "Jacob, who is this?" No reply. He looked around, but no one was there, except the blur of passing cars and the shadows of people running with umbrellas. Fear began to crawl up his spine. He thought of Madame Janet, of her soft hands and kind eyes. What would she think if she heard this? He couldn't let her believe he was guilty. Jacob wiped his face and started walking not home, but back to the mansion. He needed to speak to George in person, to tell him the truth before it was too late. The mansion was unusually quiet when he arrived. The guards at the gate exchanged uneasy glances, but opened it slowly. One of them whispered, "Ogre, say, make we no let anybody in." "I'm not just anybody," Jacob said firmly. "Please, tell him I need to see him." The guard hesitated, then nodded. "Wait here." Minutes later, the guard returned. "Ogre no day talk to anybody tonight." Jacob's heart sank. "Please, what about Madame Janet?" "She know well," the guard said softly. "Doctor say she no go see visitors tonight." Jacob stood there in the rain, feeling helpless. The fountain still sparkled in the center of the courtyard, but it looked cold now, like a memory of joy that had dried up. He turned to leave when a voice called from the balcony above. "Jacob." He looked up. It was Juliana, wearing a soft robe, her expression worried. "What happened?" she whispered. "They think I leaked a company file," Jacob said, his voice cracking. "But I didn't. I swear I didn't." Juliana's face tightened. "I believe you. Come inside quickly." She led him through the back entrance, avoiding the main hallway where the security cameras were mounted. Inside, the house was dim, the air thick with tension. "I've seen enough strange things since you came," Juliana said quietly. "And I think someone planned this." "Who?" Jacob asked. Juliana hesitated. "Roland. He's been with George for years. I've heard him on calls late at night, saying things I can't understand. He's jealous of you. He said once that he'll never let a poor street boy replace him." Jacob clenched his fists. "Then he's behind this." "Maybe," Juliana said, "but we need proof." Just then, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Juliana quickly pushed Jacob into a small storage room. "Stay here," she whispered. Through a tiny crack, Jacob saw Roland appear, holding a tablet. His lips curled into a smirk. "Madam, you're still awake," he said. "Sir asked me to prepare the morning presentation." Juliana folded her arms. "At midnight." Roland shrugged. You know how the boss likes early starts. As he turned to leave, something slipped from his pocket, a small flash drive. He picked it up quickly and walked away. Jacob's pulse quickened. That was it. That had to be the key. When the hallway was clear, Juliana opened the door. Did you see that? Jacob nodded. That flash drive, I'm sure it's connected. Juliana thought for a moment. He keeps a spare laptop in his study. If we can check it before morning. Her words trailed off, but Jacob knew what she meant. They waited until the house was completely silent. Then they moved. The study was dark except for the soft glow of a lamp. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk. A half-finished cup of coffee sat beside a pile of reports. Juliana kept watch by the door while Jacob powered on the laptop. His fingers trembled slightly as he typed. The password screen appeared. He tried the obvious ones. Roland 123, Tech 2024, George. But none worked. Juliana whispered, "Try his birthday." Jacob entered 0210 and the screen unlocked. Inside the file manager, he searched for recent documents. There it was, a folder labeled Private Access. When he opened it, his eyes widened. Screenshots of company blueprints, emails with George's signature, and one message that made his blood run cold. From Roland@techforafrica.com. Mail to Roland@techforafrica.com. To unknown. Payment received. File sent successfully. The new boy will take the fall. Jacob turned to Juliana. This is it. She covered her mouth. My God. But before they could copy it, a voice thundered from behind them. What are you doing? They froze. George stood at the doorway, his eyes blazing with confusion and anger. Roland was beside him, pretending to be shocked. Sir, I caught them in your study, he said. I told you this boy can't be trusted. Sir, please, Jacob said quickly, standing up. It's not what you think. Enough, George shouted. You sneaked into my office in the middle of the night? With my wife? Juliana tried to speak. George, listen. But Roland interrupted, holding up his tablet. He's trying to steal company data again, sir. I warned you. George's face hardened. Jacob, get out, before I call the police. Jacob's throat burned. Sir, look at the laptop. The files. Now, George barked. Tears filled Jacob's eyes, but he obeyed. He turned to Juliana, whispering, I'll prove it. He ran down the corridor and out into the night. Behind him, Roland smiled faintly in the dark. Jacob didn't sleep that night. He found shelter under a bus stop near the Lekki Bridge, his clothes still damp, his heart heavier than ever. He thought about leaving Lagos, starting over somewhere new. But then he remembered Madam Janet's words, Never change, my son. Kindness will reward you one day. He couldn't run. Not yet. Morning came grey and slow. He headed toward the office again, but as he neared the gate, he saw flashing lights, police vehicles parked in front of Tech for Africa towers. Reporters were already gathering. He froze. George was on the steps, surrounded by officers. Madam Janet stood beside him, supported by Juliana, her face pale with worry. Roland was speaking confidently to the police, waving printed documents. Jacob approached carefully. Sir. Everyone turned. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Roland smirked. That's him. The one who leaked the files. A police officer stepped forward. Are you Jacob Okafor? Yes, sir, Jacob said quietly. You're under investigation for corporate theft. Madam Janet cried out. No, he would never do such a thing. George tried to hold her back gently. Mama, please. Jacob's voice trembled. Sir, I didn't betray you. I swear, someone set me up. The officer stepped closer, handcuffs glinting. You can explain at the station. As they took his wrist, a voice shouted, Wait. Everyone turned. Juliana was holding something up high, the laptop from George's study. Before you arrest him, she said, her voice shaking but strong. You need to see this. She plugged in the flash drive and opened the message Jacob had found. The officers leaned forward. George's face drained of color as he read the email from Roland's account, proof of the setup. Roland's jaw dropped. That's fake. Someone hacked. But George cut him off, eyes blazing. Enough. I trusted you for years. Roland tried to run, but the officers were faster. They grabbed him, twisting his arm behind his back. Jacob stood frozen, chest rising and falling, unable to believe it was over. Madam Janet broke into tears, hugging him tightly. "I told you, my son. Kindness never loses." George stepped closer, guilt heavy in his eyes. "Jacob, I was wrong." Jacob could barely speak. "Sir, I forgive you." But before anyone could breathe a sigh of relief, one of the policeman's radios crackled. "Control, we've found a second device in the suspect's car, one labeled Project Mercy." George's face went pale. "Project Mercy? That's my father's foundation." Juliana turned sharply. "What do you mean?" The officer looked confused. "It seems bigger than one man's betrayal, sir. Someone else is involved." Jacob's relief froze halfway in his chest. The nightmare wasn't over. It was only beginning. The police convoy rolled through the streets of Lagos, with sirens blaring. Inside the lead vehicle, George sat silently beside Jacob and Juliana, his jaw tight, his mind racing. The words Project Mercy echoed in his head like a warning drum. Behind them, Roland sat handcuffed in another car, his face twisted with fear and anger. He refused to speak, staring blankly out the window as the rain began to fall again. When they reached the police headquarters, a detective named Inspector Kana approached them, tall, dark-skinned, calm eyes behind thin glasses. "We found something in the suspect's car," he said, holding up a small black folder marked confidential. George took it slowly and opened it. Inside were printed documents, bank transfers, photos, and coded emails. As he flipped through, his hands began to shake. This isn't just about my company," he murmured. "These accounts lead to my father's charity fund, the one we used to build schools." Juliana frowned. "What does that mean?" George exhaled shakily. "It means Roland wasn't working alone. Someone has been stealing from my family's foundation for years." The inspector nodded. "That's correct, sir. We traced several payments overseas. Roland was only a middleman." Jacob leaned forward. "So who's behind it?" Inspector Kana's voice was quiet but firm. "We're still confirming, but the name on the final transaction is one of your board members." George froze. "Which one?" "Mr. Adewale," the inspector said. George's eyes went wide. "Adewale? My father's best friend? He's been with us since the beginning." Jacob's heart sank. "Sir, he's the one who came to visit last week, right?" George nodded slowly, realizing the truth. "Yes. And he was the one who insisted Roland stay on my personal team." Juliana shook her head in disbelief. "All this because of greed." The inspector placed a reassuring hand on George's shoulder. "You can help us, sir, but first we'll need your cooperation to set a trap. We must catch Adewale red-handed." George glanced at Jacob. "Would you be willing to help me one more time?" Jacob smiled faintly. "Always, sir." 2 days later, the plan was set. Adewale was invited to a private emergency meeting at Tech for Africa headquarters. He believed Roland had already destroyed the evidence and that George wanted to negotiate a quiet settlement. But this time, hidden cameras were placed inside the boardroom. The police waited outside in unmarked vehicles. Jacob, now officially reinstated, sat quietly beside George, pretending to take notes. Madam Janet had prayed for them that morning, holding Jacob's hands and whispering, "God will not allow the wicked to succeed again." When Adewale walked into the room, he wore his usual calm smile. "George, my boy," he said warmly, patting George's shoulder. "I heard about the problem. How are you holding up?" George forced a polite smile. "Trying to stay calm, sir." "Good, good. I told you not to trust strangers." His eyes flicked briefly toward Jacob. "Sometimes the enemy enters through kindness." Jacob kept his face neutral, though his jaw tightened. George leaned back. "You're right, but I believe in giving everyone a fair chance, even those who betray me." Adewale chuckled softly. "That's noble, but dangerous." As they spoke, Jacob pressed the small recording button under the table, sending a signal to Inspector Kene's team. George continued, pretending to hesitate. "Sir, there's one last thing. Roland mentioned you. He said you were behind the transfers from Project Mercy." Adewale's smile faded for the first time. "He said what?" "Exactly that," George said quietly. "That you planned everything using the charity fund as cover." Adewale laughed, but his eyes were cold now. "You believe that fool? After all these years, you think I would steal from your father's legacy? George's gaze hardened. I want to believe you, but I saw the transactions. Adewale's hand twitched. Where did you get them? Does it matter? George asked. They exist. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Adewale's voice dropped to a whisper. You shouldn't have dug deeper, George. He reached into his briefcase. Stop! Jacob shouted, springing up. Before Adewale could pull anything out, the boardroom door burst open. Inspector Kene and his officers rushed in, guns drawn. Mr. Adewale, you are under arrest for embezzlement and conspiracy, Kene declared. Adewale froze, then slowly raised his hands. You'll regret this, George, he hissed. George exhaled shakily. No, sir. I'll finally rest. As the officers led Adewale away, the room felt lighter, like a storm finally clearing. Jacob sank into his chair, heart pounding. George turned to him, eyes filled with gratitude. You saved my family again. Jacob smiled softly. I only did what was right. George shook his head. You did more than that. You restored my faith. A week later, life began to return to normal. The company's name was cleared, and the news channels across Nigeria praised Jacob's bravery. Secretary Turn's hero exposes multi-million naira scam at Tech for Africa. The video clips went viral, and people who once laughed at him on the street now stopped to shake his hand. At home, Madam Janet recovered fully. She spent her evenings in the garden again, laughing with Jacob as they shared roasted corn and old stories. You see, my son, she said one night, you were meant to find me that day. God sent you not just to save me, but to save this entire family. Jacob smiled. Mama, I was just doing what anyone should do. She chuckled. Not everyone stops to help. That's why heaven noticed you. Juliana soon joined them, carrying a tray of tea. Mama is right, she said. You've brought peace back into this house. Just then, a familiar voice called from behind. May I join the family meeting? It was George, walking toward them with a grin. Come, my son, Madam Janet said warmly. Sit with us. George sat, glancing at Jacob. I've been thinking a lot about what you've done, how much you risked. I want to make it official. He pulled a small envelope from his pocket and handed it to Jacob. Inside was a letter printed on gold-edged paper. Jacob read slowly, then gasped. Special assistant to the CEO. Permanent position? George smiled. And a new house in Lekki. Fully yours. Jacob's eyes filled with tears. Sir, I don't know how to thank you. Just keep being yourself, George said. That's thanks enough. Madam Janet clapped her hands in joy. Ah, God is good. From carrying me on his back to being carried by blessings. They all laughed. Months passed, and the mansion became more alive than ever. George's daughter, Vicky, returned from London after finishing her MBA. She was tall, graceful, with her father's confidence and her mother's warmth. Jacob met her one sunny afternoon while helping George organize a charity event. Hi, she said, smiling. You must be Jacob, the famous assistant I keep hearing about. Jacob blushed. I don't know about famous, but yes, that's me. Vicky laughed softly. You're humble too. I like that. From that day, their friendship grew naturally. They spent evenings talking in the garden, laughing under the stars, sharing dreams about helping others. One evening, as the moon shone bright over the compound, Jacob took a deep breath and knelt before her. Vicky, he said, voice trembling, you changed my life just by being in it. Will you marry me? Tears glimmered in her eyes. Yes, Jacob, she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. Their wedding was a celebration that echoed across Lagos. George and Juliana watched proudly as their daughter walked down the aisle, escorted by Madam Janet, the same woman Jacob once found on a dusty road. When Jacob and Vicky said their vows, everyone in the church was crying, even the guards outside. Later, at the reception, George raised a glass. To Jacob, he said, a man who proved that true wealth is not in money, but in kindness. The crowd cheered. Madam Janet smiled through her tears. 2 years later, Jacob and Vicky welcomed a baby girl. They named her Olivia, after Jacob's late mother. As Madam Janet held her great-granddaughter in her arms, her wrinkled hands trembling with joy, she whispered softly, "This is what kindness builds generations of love." George placed a hand on Jacob's shoulder. "You carried my mother when the world laughed. Now, The world carries your story." Jacob smiled, eyes glistening. "It was all worth it, sir." The camera flash went off, capturing that moment forever. Madam Janet, Jacob, Vicky, and baby Olivia, all smiling beneath the golden light of evening. And in that moment, the boy who once walked home tired and hungry finally understood. Kindness is never wasted. It always finds its way home. What is your view about this story? Where are you watching from? If you enjoyed this story, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories.